Well, it's great to be at Charlestown this morning and spend some time with you, and I appreciated the words of reminiscing from a number of you today as you've talked about life and the meaning of life in some ways, and it's great to hear. And yeah, I guess today I'd like to say that I've been watching the Charlestown story from afar in some ways, having been in Childrens Miinistry the past dozen years or so, and seeing Charlestown transform, change and grow. When I was first coming here, the hall was here, of course, the church was over there, the kids were, well, there weren't really any kids. There weren't any kids. There might be one or two, but there weren't really any kids. And I thought, this is interesting. What's Charlestown going to do? And to watch the journey and where you are today has been amazing to watch. So I'd say, well done. The fact that you're actually hiring someone to work in your children's ministries, I can't applaud that anymore. And I'd like to say just fantastic to observe the Charlestown story. When I was a kid, growing up, we had an old black and white TV, and we weren't really able to watch it much at all. It sat there and didn't come on, apart from the news and play school. And us kids will get to sit around the TV for that a half hour to an hour, morning and afternoon, and watch the play school edition. And my favourite part of the play school was the windows.
This is a demonstration.
Back then they had the square window. They had the, what was it, a square, there was a circle, yeah, round, and the arch. My favourite was the arch. I always liked the arch. For some reason I just liked when they went through the arch window. In these more modern times, they've added the diamond window. So there's now 4 windows that they go through. But the adventures you would go on, the things you would see when they took you through the arch window. And for a brief time, through the TV, you are able to time travel or space travel or go somewhere on an adventure. Today, I'd like to spend a few moments talking about another window. Another window in time that just in the past 10, 15 years has been specifically identified as a very important window
This is a
that we need to
Wirecast.
embark on, that we need to think about, that we need to prioritise. And this window is called the 4 to 14 window. Now, back when I was a kid, they had what they called the 10-20 window. And I remember there was a whole lot of campaigns the church did based on latitude and longitude and reaching unreached people groups with the gospel.
This is a
and there was a lot of time and effort
Wirecast.
and money went into that, reaching these people in these places. Well, the same person that came up with that has now identified this 4 to 14 window. And it's not latitude. It's not longitude. It's in every town. It's in every community. It's the age, 4 to 14. This was first put on the map in about the year 2003 when George Barna wrote the book called Transforming Children into Spiritual Champions. It's still available because it's a really classic book that, in my opinion, set the children's ministry scene alight, and much research has been seen since then in this area. In fact, there's now a whole, what we call the child theology movement that considers the Bible, that considers theology from the idea of what happens if we place a child in the midst like Jesus did. What does theology, what does church, what does ministry look like when they do that? And there's a whole worldwide movement based on now child theology. But according to Barna, he said in his book, he said, if I could go back and do my ministry, do what I do in life all over again, and he's now an almost retired pastor, He says, I realised that in all my ministry, I didn't just miss the boat.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
I missed an entire ocean. And he said, if I could go back and do it again, I would put my ministry right in the 4 to 14 window. He discovered in his research that only 6% of adult Christians made their decision to follow God over the age of 18.
This is a
You
demonstration
hear that? Only
of
6%
Wirecast.
made their decision to follow God over the age of 18. In fact, 94% made their decision to follow Jesus and stayed with him throughout their life before the age of 14 in general. That's encouraging, also scary, and then encouraging again. That means there's no time like the present to be embarking on evangelism. And I'm so glad that Bob said this morning from this pulpit that Charlestown's efforts in regards to evangelism are our children, our families, and their parents. George Barner said that children should be our number one priority.
This is a demonstration
Why?
of Wirecast.
Because he found that their moral foundations are set by the age of 9. And their spiritual foundations are set not long after that. Now, I know there's a few builders in the audience here. When you put concrete out and you pour it out and put it into some sort of frame because it's going to run everywhere, it's pretty runny. You can mould it.
This is a
You can shape
demonstration
it.
of Wirecast.
And some kids even come along and want to inscribe upon it. And it's interesting to go sometimes into even old buildings and see what's been written into the concrete, maybe 40, 50 years ago. But give it an hour or two and it begins to go off. And give it 24 hours or so and it's pretty hard then to change much about that concrete. Unless you rip it up and start again.
This is a demonstration
And George
of
Barnes said,
Wirecast.
if the church does not invest by the age of 9 or the age of 14, after that, the window of opportunity begins to close. Now, I've seen this having been working in the area of children's ministries, and now I've just been retreaded. I now do children, family, and they've just thrown me into the bottom end of the youth department. So now I'm looking after adventurers and juniors. And so this year I had to head off just after Christmas and spend some time at summer camp. What an awesome experience that was. And what I noticed was in the juniors, this is our 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. When we did our worship and asked for a decision, most made a decision and ticked, I want to get baptised, I want to have Bible studies, I want to join a church, I want to find a Pathfinder club, I want a mentor. They ticked the boxes. And this was genuine. It wasn't just an emotional decision made then and there. It was thought about, considered, and with their cabin leaders, the decision was made. When it came to Teen 1, yeah, about half made a decision. And when it came to Teen 2, a lot less. That's now your 14, your 15, 16-year-olds. A lot less made a decision. And often I ask the church, if you grew up a Christian, when did you make your decision? Most will say, before the age of 14. But here's the question. I know that Charlestown will be different because you've changed your priorities, but most churches I go to, where does most of your evangelistic budget dollars go to? And I know that Charlestown's story is a lot different, but most churches, 80% of their dollars goes to trying to reach the adults in our community. Now, don't get me wrong, we need to reach them. The Holy Spirit can transform lives at any age. But according to research and according to Scripture, children should be our priority. It's interesting in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, we find here a story or an incident where Jesus has been preaching, and he's talking about some pretty important things to do with divorce. And then he spent some time talking about celibacy. So he's hitting some pretty hard topics, and he's preaching to the assembled audience. But as he's preaching, according to Matthew 19, it says in verse 13, then people brought little children to Jesus. So imagine that there's Jesus and he's preaching the topic and he's hitting the nail right on the head, and the adults are standing around there or seated on the grass around him, and he's preaching away. And in amongst that crowd are mums and probably dads and families, and the mums and dads, they want Jesus to just touch their children, to pray over them and to bless them. And so they're edging through the crowd, they're finding the way towards the front where Jesus is preaching, and it says there, but the disciples rebuked them. It doesn't say what the disciples said there, but and I imagine it would be something along the lines of, can't you see? Jesus is hitting the topic pretty well today. He's preaching to the adults about divorce and these heavy things, and you need to go away. Don't disrupt what he's talking about. This is pretty important. Maybe come back later, or tell the kids to go play. Jesus is too busy for children today. It says there that Jesus, in verse 14, Jesus said, let the children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there. So Jesus, like pauses mid-sermon and puts the teaching and the adult things to one side, and he says, come, let the children come. They're important. The kingdom of heaven is all about children. The kingdom of heaven is all about these kids that you see in the centre here coming towards me. And he pauses and blesses them and goes on from there. If Jesus sees children and pausing to stop and bless, take time, pray, affirm, mentor, then how much more should we? As I travel around the conference, I see a lot of churches and all sorts of different varieties.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Some might ask the question, where will they be in 10, 15 years' time unless something drastic happens? Because many have no children. Many have no children at all, and they're on their knees. A study done by Ed Stetzer entitled Come Back Churches. He wrote a book about it. He and his assistants saw this, and they studied over 300 churches who were about to close their doors and put up a sign, closed due to lack of interest. These churches were down and out, old and decaying, but were able to miraculously turn themselves around. And Ed Stetzer asked the question, what was it that made the difference?
Of Wirecast.
How did your churches turn around and grow young again? And Stetzer and his group identified 10 transformative factors that these churches invested in. The first one on his list was prayer. These churches became a praying church like never before. There's no surprise there. The only way forward is on our knees, and prayer is
This is
the
a
answer.
demonstration of Wirecast.
But number two, and you want to read the research, number two surprised even Ed Stetzer. He said, I'm not sure why this is here, but number two on his list was comeback churches focused heavily and invested significantly in children's ministries and their families. That is, they prioritised children and their families in their church, community,
This is a demonstration
and
of
evangelistic
Wirecast.
ministry. This includes things like prioritising great Sabbath schools, building bigger and better Sabbath school rooms. Charlestown's done that. Intergenerational worship. Charlestown does that. Kids clubs. Charlestown does that. Budget dollars and much more. Ed Stetzer found when churches made children a priority,
This is a
they
demonstration
grew
of
young
Wirecast.
once again and experienced renewal and growth. It should not be surprising that if you want to become a young church again, you grow young. And just recently, in the last couple of years, Cara Powell and Chap Clark from Fuller spent time again studying these churches that are growing young. And they discovered that there are
This is a
6
demonstration of
central
Wirecast.
things that churches that grow young do well. Number one, they unlock key chain leadership. Instead of centralising authority, they empower others, especially young people. And this is what they said is the test. Who holds the keys to your building?
This is a demonstration
And what
of
is
Wirecast.
their average age? And he tells a story in this book of a young kid that had just got his licence. And, well, he got his licence. Where did he go for a drive to? He drove to the church and turned up to show off, hey, look, I've got my licence. And as he drove in, one young at heart lady saw him and went out to the
This is a
car park
demonstration of
and welcomed him,
Wirecast.
congratulated him and said, got your licence, what are you going to do now? I said, I don't know. I'm going to get around and do some things and drive some places. And I said, well, because you've got a car, you can help me. You see, we've got this drink machine that needs filling up. Every single week we need to put drinks in the drink machine.
This
So because
is
you've got a car and
demonstration of Wirecast.
you could pick up the drinks and you could fill the machine for us. And because of that, you're going to need a key to the church. And so this young guy gets a key to the church. Oh, and by the way, if you need some drink for yourself, like a can or two to get you along the way, feel free to help yourself. But here are the keys. And the young guy says, suddenly, I realised that I was important. That I belonged because I
Demonstration of
had a
Wirecast.
key. And now he's one of the deacons in that church. He says, I never want to leave because I belong. Unlock key chain leadership. Number 2, emphasise and mentor with the young people in your church. Instead of judging or criticising, step into the shoes of the current generation. Number 3, churches grow young, take the message
This
of
is a
Jesus
demonstration of Wirecast.
seriously. The message of God's love, God's grace, and God's forgiveness. Instead of asserting formulaic gospel claims of what children need to do, welcome young people into a Jesus-centred way of life. Growing young churches emphasise the gospel. And in my research and and anecdotal evidence, I've found that churches can get everything right,
This is a
but unless
demonstration of
children
Wirecast.
feel loved by the Saviour, unless they find grace and acceptance at the foot of the cross, it won't amount to much. Children need to know they're not just loved by the church, but they're loved by Jesus and accepted by him no matter
This is a demonstration
what.
of Wirecast.
Take Jesus' message seriously. Number 4, fuel a warm community. Instead of focusing on cool worship or programs, aim for warm peer and intergenerational friendships. That's why I like Bob's announcement. We don't want you over there by yourselves. We want you here where you belong, in intergenerational community where we can have a cuppa together and share. So well done, Charlestown, and right behind Bob's announcement. Let's find all the ways that we can be together. Children belong. People ask me sometimes, say, Pastor Darron, why are you a pastor? Why is your other brother a pastor? And your other brother a pastor? And your other brother a pastor?
This is a demonstration
And
of
your sister
Wirecast.
a teacher in one of our schools? And your other brother a businessman that works for Telstra and owns electronic stores? We love him. And I can't give you an answer apart from the fact that I was immersed in a warm, loving, mentoring community.
This is a
And I
demonstration
can't
of
tell you
Wirecast.
a miraculous story of having a wild time and find my way back again. I never had that. Because I felt like I belonged right from a young tacker, a 4-year-old, if you like. I felt like I belonged and that the church was mine as much as it was the 99-year-olds. I could tell you about Pathfinder leaders, adventurer leaders, school chaplains, school teachers. I could tell you about my uncle
This is a
and my auntie
demonstration of
and family
Wirecast.
members. I can tell you about the head deacon and the elder. People who knew me by my name, called me by name, and included me. Right from a young age, I played the flute. And I must have been terrible right from the start. But every week, old Mr. Elder, his name was, would call me down the front or ring home and say, can Darron bring his flute?
This is a demonstration of
And
Wirecast.
I would play alongside him for church every single week. I felt like I belonged. I could tell you about Pastor Kevin Silver, my grade 5 teacher that took me out bird banding. My brother and myself. Now, looking back now, it'd probably be unsafe these days for a teacher to do this, but he did it. He would take my brother and myself into the bush, we'll go walking, set up nets, and we'll catch birds.
This is a
on a
demonstration
Sunday.
of Wirecast.
This is out of school hours. And we would put bands on these birds. You belong to the Bird Observers Club, and then you let them go, and you'd record where you caught the bird. Then down the track, you might get a message back of where someone else found the bird and where they ended up. So we would put up nets and catch birds. Remember one time we had to go and catch these darn pelicans that were by the side of the river in Mildura there. They'd come in from Lake Eyre or somewhere. And ever tried to catch a pelican?
This is a
As
demonstration
kids, it was a lot of fun
Wirecast.
with this guy just trying to catch and hold these pelicans and get a band on it. But we did it. And as we walked, he talked. And I saw Jesus. I could tell you about person after person, this warm community that invested in me. And one day, when I saw how Jesus worked for the cloud of witnesses, in my community, I
This
thought
is a
it
demonstration
might
of
work
Wirecast.
for me too. And I found Jesus for myself. And here I stand. Number 6, churches that grow young are the best neighbours. Instead of condemning the world outside the church's walls, churches that grow young enable young people and children to neighbour well, locally
This is a demonstration
and
of
globally.
Wirecast.
And those 6 things I found are the 6 things that keep a church from going over the hill and losing it. These churches grow young and stay young. Churches growing young prioritise young people, not just for the sake of making young people happy, but because the whole church benefits. One pastor of over 40 years put it like this:
This is a
everybody
demonstration
rises
of Wirecast.
when you focus on children and teens and families. Adults in another church reflected, young people are like salt. When they're included in our audience, they make everything taste better. I like that. I like that. So here's my challenge. Let's grow young and stay young.
This is a demonstration
Let's
of
prioritise.
Wirecast.
Let's make sure children are included in everything we do. Let's make our church so warm and so friendly and so intergenerational, and I know Charlestown does this, that these children here today feel like this is their church too. And in so doing, the people over there right now doing swimming, the people up the road that go to school during the week,
This is a
the
demonstration
people that
of
come into our
Wirecast.
kids club will realise that they belong too. I'll tell you what, if you reach the heart of the child, you'll reach the heart of the parent every single time. McDonald's knows this. AFL and rugby know this. If you invest in children, you reach
This is
their
a demonstration
families,
of Wirecast.
you reach their communities, you reach the world. Deuteronomy 6:4-12 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments give you today be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, when you go to kids club, when you go to church,
This
when
is
you
a
go to Sabbath
demonstration
school.
of Wirecast.
Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, to give you a land with large flourished cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you
This is
eat
a
and are
demonstration of
satisfied,
Wirecast.
be careful. You don't forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. My prayer for Charlestown is that you will be that kind of church. And that you'll be a model for other churches that see what growing young looks like. Well done, Charlestown.
This
I've
is a
enjoyed following
demonstration
the
of
journey.
Wirecast.
I know the best is yet to come.